You may have heard of the social contract. What is it? What does it mean? Should you have one? Well, today I'll discuss some of my experiences with the social contract and maybe some advice for you to navigate your own. Greetings and salutations, nerds and sentient life forms. I am the Nemean Beard, and I hope you are enjoying these videos. I'm having fun making them. I'm going to grab a quick drink of coffee, and I would appreciate that if you would mosey your way over to the like and subscribe button. It definitely helps me out. Um, this is a really good blend, actually. It's from Charleston Roasters is the name of the company. And I got this at, we have what's called a fresh market where I live, which is kind of like a more expensive Whole Foods. Um, but I don't shop there a lot, but they do have these really good Korean wings, and they have good coffee blends and good root beer. So I'm a sucker for those things. I'll put a link to Charleston Roasters in the description below. So it was the early 2000s. I'd recently moved to my girlfriend's home city, and I didn't know anyone there aside from her and her family. I was without friends or even strangers to play D&D with. The internet was a weird place in the beginning of the new millennium, and aside from the EN World message board, I wasn't really active on any of the online RPG communities. Shout out to Morris and Jeff Ranger. I think about the Gen Con when we met, and I smile about that often. But alas, Gen Con is only the best 4 days in gaming, and it doesn't last year round. So what was I to do? There were a few online group locators and other like classified ads just for gamers. But inviting strangers from the internet over to your house wasn't really copacetic yet. So I headed out to my friendly local gaming store. Um, Shout out to Carlos at the Game Preserve. They did have like a D&D slash RPG night on like a Tuesday or Thursday, someday through the midweek. But I got up really, really early for work, and that just didn't, that wasn't a super great option for me. So the manager, Carlos, um, said, hey, we got a bulletin board. Why don't you check it out? And if you want, you can just put an ad saying you're a player looking for a game to join. So I decided that's what I would do, and Carlos let me make a little ad right there at the checkout counter, and he even gave me some tips as to what to put on my ad. And so I went back to post it on the boards, and there were other ads up there already. And so I took a couple contacts of games that I thought I might fit into. And within a few days, I had made contact with a group, and they were like super close to my house. Zang. If you know where that reference is, let me know in the comments. Um, they gave me some directions on how to create a character, and they said that we would be going through the city of Spider. Shoot, I can't think of it now. It was the massive 3.5. I don't know if it was a campaign, but it was a super long adventure. Um, City of the Spider Queen? Nope, that's not right. Yeah, maybe City of Spiders. I can't remember. The Albino Drow, that one. So I had made a character and I brought it ready to go. I had opted for a fighter slash sorcerer build that used the spike chain, and I was kind of excited. Everything worked. They played on the weekends. They were close, and they seemed nice enough. I was pretty certain that I wasn't going to be killed and hacked up and put into a freezer. So game night arrived, and it was slightly awkward at first when we kind of introduced ourselves. But I'm a hard guy not to like, so things smoothed over pretty quick. And we sat down to play. I handed the DM my character sheet to look over, and they handed me a piece of paper that said, Contract of Ye Old Gaming Table. They even spelled old with an E, so you knew it was authentic. What is this? I asked. It's our social contract, one said. And then Mike, the guy that lived there, he said, it's basically house rules, what's acceptable at the gaming table, and how we treat each other. I said, okay. So I read through it. I didn't have to sign it or anything, but it did definitely give me a feel for how they operated as a group. And those people that I showed up and played with that night, they became some of my best friends while I lived there. I feel like that's probably pretty common. If you play D&D a few times, there's just something about it that you form a bond. And every group I've really ever played with, they eventually become some of my best friends. And I think I owe a lot of early navigation of those relationships to that social contract. Now, some people make like legitimate contracts that everyone signs. I've never made one that I required people to sign, but I have signed one. But I feel like it should be a discussion, right? Communication is kind of the core of not only the social contract, right, which is how you interact, play the game, and have fun together, but it's also the core of this hobby that we love, communication. And so I like to go through these things at character creation, with character creation, kind of as my session zero. We'll talk about what we have, expectations and some rules, and get something down, and then we'll make characters and we'll discuss some lore and spitball and kind of have the group come together narratively. And then we might do a couple encounters, and that's session zero. I might do a video on session zero in the future. If you do something cool with session zero, let me know. But there is one rule that I don't ever put on the social contract, because I feel like I shouldn't have to say it. But I've read a lot of your comments on people's videos, and I've read a lot in forums and Twitter, and maybe I should say it. Maybe I should just not stop saying it. Don't be a jerk. I don't mean your character. I mean you, the player. Life is hard. Don't be a jerk. This game, a lot of people use this game as a reset and an escape from the grind and the hardships of life, myself included. We've all carved out time to be here. The last thing I want to do is show up and have someone be a jerk. Respect each other as people, right? Tabletop RPGs, it caters to a group of diverse people with all types of backgrounds, and they have all types of routes through life. And honestly, if you can't sit at a table or sit online on a platform for a few hours and have fun because of fill in the blank person or type of person, then don't. It's not your job to change them. It's not your job to get them to leave. Everyone has rough days. That's forgivable. You just being a bag of expletives and pouring that on everyone at the table, that's unacceptable. Well, what to include in your social contract? Well, the basis of my social contract is group fun, right? Like I mentioned that before. We're all showing up. We're all taking time out of our schedule. When I was 13, 14, just kind of learning this game, and we just played on a whim, I didn't really think about this. But now that I'm an adult that has lots of things eating at my time, for me to say, hey, on 4 hours Sunday evenings, I'm going to go play D&D, and that takes time away from my family, takes time away from other things I could be doing, other creative projects, other responsibilities, even work sometimes. I don't want to just show up to have you ruin my fun. So the core of it is group fun, which means your fun plus my fun equals group fun. And implied in that is that no one's fun is more important than another's. One player shouldn't just get to have fun at other people's expense. And people have fun differently. One player might just want to kick down doors and kill monsters. Another might be interested in wooing a noble maiden. People identify with different parts of the games. Let them do some of these things and let them feel cool and useful in the scope of your game. These are all things you can talk about during the social contract. You'll learn what your players enjoy: combat, exploration, social situations, political intrigue, hex crawls, murder mystery. This will give you a type of feel, or a feel for the type of player that they are. Are they introverted? Are they extroverted? Are they more of a consumer, as in they just like to kind of take in the world and the story of the adventure? Or are they a contributor? Are they like actively pursuing and maybe even manipulating the plot points? Do they like the spotlight all the time? One thing I also like to do during session zero is ask what have been some of their favorite moments from playing. If they're new to the game, they've never played before, I usually ask them, well, what about video games? What are your favorite video games? And if they say like Skyrim or Final Fantasy VII, I'll ask what were some of their favorite moments from that. So group fun, your fun plus my fun equals our fun, and that's good. Um, I should say this though, sometimes it just doesn't work out. People are different, and maybe it's not your type of game at all. I remember I got invited in college. I got invited to play D&D, but what it really was Vampire the Masquerade. Um, I've played Vampire twice. Well, three times, I guess, if you count the one time in high school. But we didn't really play. We just showed up, and it kind of devolved into something else. And no one really ever told me what was going on. I just got, I just didn't have a good time. I'm not saying I wouldn't enjoy it. Like, I watched the Critical Role cast play Vampire, and I was like, this is really cool. Like, I didn't do any of that. And so um, sometimes your game just doesn't work. Like, I just wanted something different from the game. Um, Sometimes life gets in the way. That's okay. Sometimes it doesn't work out. Tabletop RPGs are a game, not a marriage. And I say all that to say, in your social contract, you should talk about what happens when someone leaves and or joins the group. Um, these type of things are helpful to talk about at the beginning. If you're talking to a guy at work and you're like, oh yeah, and he's like, man, I used to play D&D, and hey, come play. The other people might not be cool with somebody jumping mid-campaign. I wouldn't have a problem, but some groups that might kind of destroy what they've got going on, and how you should leave. Sometimes life just gets in the way, like I said. It's also helpful to talk about the type of game that's being run. I mean, this might sound like a no-brainer. All these might actually sound like no-brainers, but talk about what system you run. Talk about the house rules. Talk about what's the elevator pitch for your campaign. Again, I might have not even showed up to that dorm room had I known they were playing Vampire the Masquerade and didn't actually roll any dice. Um, Talk about the mortality rate of characters. Is this like an old school dungeon crawl where it might be helpful to have 3 or 4 characters or character concepts ready to go? Um, is it an open world or an adventure path or a dungeon crawl? Again, all helpful things to talk about beforehand. Um, I also like to talk about the scope of the campaign, right? Is it a one shot? Is it a single dungeon? Is it a long campaign? Do you expect to go from 3rd to 12th level, 1st to 5th? These sort of things. Also talk about the nuances of your game. Combat. Are you really into tactics, and do you use minis in the battle map, or do you use theater of the mind? Those are all helpful things for players to get a feel of the game, and for you to talk about that. I mean, maybe you are like, you want to run a super tactical game, and the rest of your players are like, I don't know about that. They might not have fun if that's all they do is try to figure out which direction to take a 5-foot step and what maneuver is optimal at certain points. So talk about the type of game you're running. Let's talk about logistics. Like I said, when I was 13, I never thought about these things at all. But it is helpful to talk about the schedule of your game, when you play, how often you will play. Those things are easily enough decided. You can talk about, when people can get together. Is it every other week? Is it every week? Is it twice a week? I used to think more D&D was better, but now that I'm older, I don't know if I necessarily find that statement true or not. Maybe you have a floating schedule on, you're not exactly sure when you're going to play. You just say, we're going to play every other weekend, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. What days work for you guys? What happens when you cancel a session? What dictates the cancellation of a session? Um, some groups, if one player can't make it, they just don't play. Um, some groups, if one player doesn't make it, the DM will run their PC. Uh, Again, I've had it where if you can't make it, someone runs your character, and you get half experience points. But know what dictates a cancellation. Know what happens if a character can't make it. When I had started my son and his friends playing, we had people in and out all the time, right? It was just kids, teenagers. They don't always have 100% control of their schedule, so they couldn't say, yes, I'll be there. So we would just there was a wizard in Wisconsin that would summon these characters to do his dishes when they couldn't make it. Food, that's also worth talking about. What's your plan for food and snacks? Some people pitch in $5, $10 a session. Do you bring your own personal snacks and drinks? Setup and cleanup kind of goes into that. What are your expectations for pregame and postgame? Are people expected to help pick up? Do people have specific duties? You bring the pizza, you bring drinks. Hey, can you put the table up in the garage, et cetera, et cetera. Pets and kids. Not that I view them on the same level, but figure out what the plan is for that. It's awesome to share in the experience of RPGs with your kids. That was one of the biggest privileges of my life, was to teach my kids to play D&D and tabletop RPGs. But talk about these expectations beforehand. Don't use your group as a babysitter, right? Like if a group of 5, you have 5 people and you just decide, hey, my 10-year-old daughter is going to join the game. Again, that's a decision you guys need to make as a group. If your gaming space has pets, that should be addressed. I didn't used to think that was a big deal. I don't have allergies, but one time a guy drove like over an hour and a half to play with us, and our host had 2 dogs, and with his allergies, he didn't even last half an hour. He just couldn't do it. So it's worth mentioning. And nowadays, we have emotional support animals, or some people might be afraid of animals. Again, these are worth just a short discussion. Trust me. Also worth noting, talk about how you handle rules and intra-party conflict. If you always have, now I mean this intra-party conflict in character, right? Like, what is allowed for your characters? Do you allow your characters to use their skills on other characters? Do you allow their characters to maybe steal? When I first started, the group Rogue extorted me for 10% of what I made in the dungeon. After I had kind of got a feel for the game, I started to pick his pocket and steal from his backpack. Some groups might not allow that. I've heard stories of some groups that they fought each other all the time. That was kind of their goal. Now, if you have a player that causes friction, not a character, a player, see the rules about don't be a jerk and group fun. Know how you handle rules disputes. Some people even get nuanced to talk about how the dice are rolled, but you should talk about what you do when there's a dispute about the ruling. My take on it is, if you can explain to me in 30 seconds or less why what I'm saying is wrong, or point to a definitive ruling in the rule book in 30 seconds or less, my ruling stands until after the game, when we can kind of go on this. What I don't want to happen is for them to say no, me to say yes, and then we argue. Then the other players are forced to pick sides or just sit there on their phones, and we're not playing D&D, we're just arguing. So if you can discuss with me why why I'm wrong about something, then I'm right until we figure that out after the game. Talk about how you generate characters and what material you should include. This wasn't as big of a deal kind of until 5th edition. It was around in 3rd edition, for sure, but there's just a lot of crazy, unbalanced homebrew classes out there. I've seen some people that get like 3 extra bonus actions in a round. That disrupts the action economy of D&D 5th edition. But so you want to go over like what sources you can use. Can you use, is it Player's Handbook only? Is it Player's Handbook and Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, et cetera, et cetera. We talked about GM rulings and how I kind of handle that. By the way, I have actually left a game at a convention once because a player and a GM couldn't stop arguing about the rules. The GM was in fact not right, but it didn't matter because in the scope of the game, that one ruling would not have changed in it. Even if the character died, that wouldn't have changed anything in the scope of the game. It's worth talking about what everyone expects out of a game. Talk about the DM's vision for the campaign and the overall view. Is it low magic? Is it high fantasy? Will the players have opportunity to gain land or titles? Is there an expectation of high level play, or will the players, only really get to 5th or 6th level? I mentioned that before, but what are your players supposed to bring? You expect them to bring your own dice? You expect them to bring their own miniatures? Are character sheets provided? Should they have their own copy of the Player's Handbook? The answer is yes, they should always. But, are you going to not let them use your Player Handbook if they don't bring one? Things to talk about. Let's talk about non-negotiables. I feel like this should be, this should always be in the discussion before you actually play. And what I mean by non-negotiables is things like drugs and alcohol. Some people play with those. I'm not opposed to that. My ruling is no. Well, I don't drink anyway. I'm 14 years into recovery from being an alcoholic, so that's a no for me. But I understand that some people just like to have a couple beers or some wine or whatnot. But there should be some rules of the host home and some expectations that you discuss about how these things work. If anybody has any trigger points from trauma or they're uncomfortable with certain subject matter, that should be discussed as well. But I always say that I'm available via email or private message if people maybe feel more comfortable addressing that in that manner. Rape, graphic torture, graphic sexual content, untoward violence against people and animals, that's a hard no for me. And I really don't tolerate a lot of skirting around the edge either. They're pretty much anathema at the table, and I will make people leave if they press the issue. Luckily, I don't think I've ever really had to bring that up. The only thing I've ever even come close to was the torture thing, and I just, as soon as it started, I just said, look, we're not going to graphically go into this. We can gloss over that. That's kind of part of the game. That's part of the medieval genre, right? We see that in movies all the time, but some people are just uncomfortable with it. I don't want to narrate it. I don't want to role play it. We'll just take an elevated, exploded view of it and look down on it. People are like, well, untoward abuse towards people. Like, by that I just mean the random killing of NPCs, children, old men, women, anyone that you... I mean, I don't really have to explain myself, but those sorts of things are... I play this game to get away from real life. I don't want to do it in the game world as well. So in closing, I say all that. This idea of the social contract is how we communicate and we interact with each other and with other people through the medium of this hobby. There are a few templates online. A quick Google search of D&D and social contract will give you some few options. I've seen templates, and I've even seen pre-written contracts that people shared from like their Google Docs. And this can be helpful to just take one of those, or to get an idea of how you can frame those. And what it does is it just helps us manage the expectations of our game and the communication of that. So thank you for sticking around and watching this video. I apologize that it was so long. So until I see you next time, game well.